Yes, guys, I wanted to run you through Mr. Joe Lombardi's incredible transformation that we saw over the last year. Now, when Joe came to me, he just had a little baby, a little boy, 2 months earlier. And I find there's two guys in this scenario. You've got guy A who says, you know what, I'm busy, I've got a kid in the way, I've got this, I've got that, I'm busy at work. Now is not a time for me. Now is not a time for my physical health. Then you've got guy B, that is Joe. He says to himself, right, I'm busy, but I'm going to put myself as number one here because I know when I put myself number one, everything else in my life improves. And Joe's been a role model to that. Is yes, he's had to put time into this process. Yes, at times he's had really crazy busy weeks and it's been difficult to stick to his health and fitness standards. But because he's been willing to put that work in, he can now sit here 1 year later and say, I put my heart in, I put my challenging days in, and now I sit here with this result. Running a marathon off the back of struggling to do 5Ks before and losing 24 pounds of stubborn body fat. To do that as a new dad is incredible. Now, before Joe came to me, you can see the picture over the left. Fluctuating weight up and down with no clear game plan. There'd been years on end where he'd been going up and down. Sometimes he'd lose a bit of weight, sometimes he'd gain a bit of weight, but there was no real consistency. There was always a lack of momentum with what he was doing. Energy massively up and down, and that all came to nutrition, struggling to run 5Ks. Genuinely, when Joe came to me, I remember him going to football and him having a really sore back after playing football, him barely being able to walk the next day, and that's where he was. Low motivation, not being confident with his top off. So if you're listening to that and thinking to yourself, you can't make a transformation when Joe's literally got a young son and has managed to achieve a marathon and lose almost 2 stone with all them circumstances, that in itself should be enough for you to look at and say, you know what? I've got the tools, I've got the ability to do this, because you always do. It's always going to be mindset and the people you surround yourself with. And Joe just coming into our coaching and starting to surround himself with higher achieving men, just from having me hold him accountable, has made a big difference. And we'll run you through that. Now, in terms of where he's gone to, I would say the biggest difference for Joe has been having a clear vision. So we'll regularly jump on a call and we'll say to Joe, right, okay, cool. Once we achieve this goal, what's next? And that was after the marathon, how we managed to go and kick on and lose a stone after the marathon prep. We went from 89 kg down to 82 kg now. It's 7 kilos lost since the marathon. And that all came from us saying to him beforehand, right, the marathon's here. What's going to happen after the marathon? What's next for you after that? And even at this point, when we're down to 82 kilos, I'll be jumping on calls with Joe and saying, well, what's next for you, mate? Because the thing is in fitness is you're always going to achieve that mountain peak and you need to know what's coming next. Otherwise, you're going to come backwards. I've seen it so many times over the year for guys is they get towards their initial target, they get excited about the fact they've hit it, they come backwards, and suddenly they're 5 steps behind where they were when they achieved their target. So always having that next level of vision in place will go a long way for you. Higher energy, less stress, and we can see, again, he put his hard work in. He came through a time which on paper would have seemed very difficult having a little boy, but what that's allowed him to do is have more energy for the little one, have less stress, so he can give more back to his family as well. Not relying on motivation, that's been something that's been key for Joe, has been not relying on motivation because he wakes up and he isn't motivated. I wake up and I'm not motivated. Motivation comes from you actually doing the do and taking the task, but I find a lot of people I speak to are always relying on motivation, waiting for a feeling to come to them. But what you need is a proven system in your life that actually gives you motivation, because when you get the result, you always want to push on to the next level once you have the result in place there. So it's a case of saying to ourselves, right, how can we find that proven system that works in my life rather than relying on a feeling when I wake up in the morning. Confident in and out of clothes, and we can jump through and run you through the phases. Phases are slightly different for Joe because he came in and the predominant thing he came to us was for the marathon. And he came to us and he wanted to lose body fat. So what we wanted to do was make sure that he wasn't going into the marathon feeling heavy. We wanted to take some timber off of his off his lower body, so he could just have less pressure on his joints through the marathon prep. So over the opening phase, the goal was to drop 8 pounds in the space of 4 weeks and get through that quite quickly. We wanted to focus on building running ability. I find that going into a fat loss phase, you can focus on running ability for, to be honest with you, even up to an 8-week span, that you can focus on consistently building running ability. Now, it can go hand in hand towards the fact of, right, well, when you're consistently in a calorie deficit, it doesn't really factor for you improving performance, but your body is getting lighter through that dieting phase. So you are going to have less pressure on your joints and you are going to have less weight to carry. So you can technically become faster despite the fact that you're not really fueling your performance. So we were giving ourselves the ability to work on his running ability. We were building strength. We were improving energy. And the main thing realistically was being ready for the next step. I wanted Joe to be ready for this next phase. When I say to you about visioning these next phases, this was something we were consistently relaying to Joe, not only on a week-to-week basis, but a day-to-day basis as well. We were making sure he always had his vision and mission in front of him. Because week to weeks at times you're not going to see big results. When you see a big result like this today of a marathon and dropping almost 2 stone as well, is you don't see them sort of wins on a daily and weekly basis. These are sort of wins that come out of, right, okay, cool, have you been consistent for a 10-week span? This phase 1 and phase 2. If I'm honest with you, the phase 2 process over here lasted over 20 weeks. It was quite a lengthy time that Joe was focused on the marathon prep because he started at running under 5 kilometers at a time. So our focus solely here was the marathon. We wanted to fuel Joe's performance. We wanted to keep his body weight as low as possible because you are going to gain body weight when you're focused on performance. But at the end of the day, if he'd gained 10 kilos, the amount of extra pressure that would have put on his joints would have been ungodly. So we wanted to make sure we could keep body weight as low as possible, go through what I call the main gain, where we're looking to gain maximum half a pound per week. Once he'd achieved the marathon, well, he did a half marathon through it as well, but once he'd achieved the marathon, of course, we needed a deload, we needed time out of there. But what we wanted to make sure was at that point, we could put the hammer down with fat loss. And because Joe had been through these initial phases, because he'd built up his arsenal of tactics, this phase here has been fucking easy for Joe. I've seen him go from 89 down to 82, and it all comes from the fact that he went through these original phases. So if you are going to focus on a big performance phase and an endurance phase, I really recommend you go through this initial phase 1 of losing the fat in the first place, because you prime yourself, and when you do gain a little bit of weight through here, you actually run the marathon at a lighter weight than you initially started at, because Joe started at 94, but he ran the marathon at 90 kilos. Because we'd already gone through that phase 1 process of dropping the body weight. So I'd really recommend that you go through that leading down process before you go into the performance phase. Now with the phase 4, we've actually not been through the phase 4 yet, but you can see we're already visioning that next phase for him. So the minute he achieves 80 kilos, at that point he's going to be down 14 kilos in total. Our focus then is going to be build muscle. Because realistically, you can only knock on the door so long of fat loss. When you do lose something like 10, 14 kilos, yes, you can keep pushing. I've seen guys lose 30 kilos in certain phases, but there does become an element of mental burnout. For example, someone like Joe, he goes to football quite often. He's going to want to have a social life in there. He's going to want to have meals out. So if you continue pushing your fat loss, you've got to look at your lifestyle. Is it realistic for me to diet for longer than 12 to 14 weeks? I know for myself, I like dieting for roughly that 12-week span. So it's going to be the exact same for Joe. Once he gets down to 80 kilos, he'll have been dieting at that point for roughly around about 12 weeks. We're going to take him into the next phase. And after he's been through a muscle building phase, which I'm going to recommend he goes through for at least a couple of months. It could be 3, 4, 5, 6 months, depending on what he's willing to do. Big benefits from that is reducing the diet fatigue and improving the natural testosterone. He could again be ready for another dieting phase after that. Now, I'm not going to touch too much because we've been going for 8 minutes already. But of course, the main things that we're looking for here, realistically, without the nutrition, this just wouldn't have been possible. So what we've done for Joe is we had taken him through the hybrid nutrition approach. We've taken him through calorie tracking approaches, and that has been his predominant tool, has been the calorie tracking approach. But realistically, what we've done to make sure Joe's been doing it has been accountability. Like, I've been in his corner 6 days per week. And when Joe was going through a stressful time, I was speaking to Joe every single day to make sure he was tracking his calories in, monitoring his water intake as well. Water intake was absolutely vital for this process because most of the common injuries I see come from when guys are dehydrated. So we've been monitoring Joe's water intake each day, the amount of calories he's been consuming, and also his body weight every single day. And just by having that accountability to the training and the nutrition, and bear in mind with the training as well, Joe's not stepped foot in a gym for more than 2 days per week through this entire transformation. He's created this transformation here where he's managed to go and run a marathon, and he's also managed to lose almost 2 stone at this point without even stepping the foot in the gym for more than 2 times per week. So, when you're looking at this, you'll need to commit less than you actually think you need to. It's going to be consistency over a long-term span and making sure you have the right people in your corner as well. So in terms of the next steps, I don't currently have any space to build you a game plan, but I would love to chat to you over on Instagram. So if you'd like to reach out to me, it's Coachmatt.wilson. I'm happy over this next week just to speak to you in the DMs. We can build you a bit of a base game plan. If you're watching this a couple of weeks after it's come out, after week commencing the 18th of August, we are going to have some availability again to build you some game plans. So what I advise you do is if you went through this day and you think to yourself, right, I want to drop some body weight, I want to be able to build some muscle, I genuinely want to achieve some confidence with my top off, despite the fact that we're not currently taking clients on, I'd still love to have a chat with you. So reach out to me at Instagram I look forward to hearing from you.